What kind of talk was it?
This is Jesse. Well, this is Jesse Freeman.
Hi.
Actual game design documents for indie developers. Go, Jesse.
So I was just going to make something up before I came, and then I was asked to do a talk. Yesterday at Amazon, we had a big developer day, and apparently my talk went over so well that I was asked to do it again. So let's see if I actually remember it. So the talk is practical game design documents for indie developers, which is a lot of marketing speak. Hey, that's me. So my name is Jesse Freeman. I work at the Amazon Appstore, and I'm head of partner marketing. And basically my job is to work with game engines to make sure that they support Fire OS and our tablets and our devices. And one of the reasons I came out here is yesterday we launched support with Game Maker Studio for Fire OS. We actually had support in Game Maker Studio 1, and now we have even better support in Game Maker Studio 2, right?
Yeah.
Better. So, and my job basically is also to help developers. So the way that I approach these partnerships is that I look for how do we unblock developers. So I don't care what game engine you use, but what I want to make sure is that the ones that you do use support our platforms. So that being said, I've been a developer for 20 years. If you don't follow me on Twitter, that's my handle. And if I'm not using 250 characters now to complain about Delta, for the most part, I'm usually talking about game development and stuff like that. And I've created lots of games, apps, websites from all kinds of high-profile companies and not. And I'm from New York, if you couldn't tell from my accent. So that being said, like the main structure of the talk is go over a little bit of what game design documents are, how to prototype ideas, and some popular frameworks for using for building building games. And maybe I should have like truncated it just to one game engine, but you know, when in Rome.
20 minutes.
20. So, what? There are some other engines. So, game design documents. Has anyone not heard of a game design document before? Okay, good. Sometimes these talks have to be a little generic for people. But basically, the short end of it is that just having a good idea isn't always good enough to make a game. A lot of us have really great ideas, but actually sitting down and coding it, especially if you just start coding it without really thinking it through, is pretty much a very bad way to make a game. So one of the things that we try to do is focus this stuff into some sort of document or structure. So I love this tweet by Sean. This is your first game idea. You probably want to build this thing at the top, which is some sort of Mad Max car dragging a hot tub behind it. But the reality is that you should probably just build a unicycle. And while there's a lot going on in the picture, the reality is that the game that you want to build for the first time should be really simple. How many people have never built a game before? 2 people. Okay, yeah, it's okay. You can be shy. It's like, I've not built a very good game yet. I've built lots of games, not good ones. So when you're getting started, or even if you're a seasoned game developer, just having some sort of structure really helps actually get to the hardest part of making a game, which is completing it. A lot of people talk about making games, but really very few people talk about actually completing games. So some animated bullet points. Basically, the idea with a document is that you want to really define what your game is about. You also want to figure out what special features your game has over the competition. It's okay to talk about other games, especially if the document's for yourself. You know, if you wanted to use like, hey, it's going to be a plumber and he's going to wear overalls and he's going to go down pipes, that's okay because it gives people a frame of reference when you're explaining to them, this is what my game is like, and it's like X, Y, and Z game. Don't copy a game. Take some elements from games and then reuse them, but also, when you're telling someone how a game works, it's always best to give some sort of analogy so that they understand. Also, what do you need to build it? Are you a programmer? Do you need an artist? Are you an artist? Do you need a programmer? Figuring this stuff out ahead of time really helps because sometimes when you go to build a game, everyone wants to try to do everything themselves. And luckily, I have a background in art and I'm a self-taught programmer, so I can do a lot of stuff myself, but not everyone can. So if you can't, do the pieces that you're good at and then go find someone else who can help you. And writing this document is incredibly important because when you're working with someone who's going to complement your skills, being able to explain your game idea to them is really important as well. And then finally, put as many details as you can into the document. So the analogy I sort of use is back in the development days, We had this idea of like waterfall, which is where you documented an app and you literally wrote every single thing about it. And then there was agile, where you really sort of talked about high level things and then broke it down into smaller chunks and did those smaller chunks. So, it's best to try to find what works best for you. Game design documents traditionally have been these like really big, they used to call them the Bible, right? Like it used to be, you wrote everything about the game and you had to follow it exactly. But nowadays, especially if you're a single developer, you don't need to write that. You just need to write just enough information to keep yourself organized. So the true game design document is really this highly detailed living document of the video game. And like I said, it used to be just have everything in there. But game design documents nowadays don't really have to follow that, especially if you're doing stuff by yourself or you're working in a small group. So this would be the part where I'd show you one of my game design documents, but I don't really want to show you my rear while I try to scroll through it. But here, let's see if we can just do this real quick in a polite way. There we go. Okay, so this is just one of my game design documents. This is a game design document that I actually wrote for a game jam. So a lot of people, when they do a game jam, they just simply start coding right away and start trying to make the game. But I usually take the first night, especially if you're saying like Ludum Dare, where based on my time zone, I'd usually around like 6 o'clock they announce it, and then I have the evening. So I'll wind up just coming up with a theme, figuring out what the theme is, and then going through and just start writing out the whole idea of what my game is going to be. So everything is sort of structured in a way where the first thing I do is I go through and I talk about what the game actually is going to be about so that I have a high concept. And then after I go and define that, I just go through and I do very simple things like what's the flow of the game? What are the screens going to be like? How do I organize the structure of the game? Because a lot of the parts that we don't want to build are going to be the UI, the help screens, all the stuff that holds the game together. You can't just release a core mechanic and expect people to like it. So I plan out a lot of that stuff. I'll use comps. I'll go into Photoshop and I'll just sort of like mock everything up so I can see how it looks. I go into a lot of detail where if I need to do stuff like 9 slicing, I'll figure out what the UI needs to look like. And this way I can go through and as I'm building the game, I don't have to spend a lot of time figuring this stuff out. I try to do as much as I can without coding ahead of time to be prepared. And then as I go through further, you'll see like everything is sort of broken down into screens so I could see each of the screens, even stuff like loading screens. Like I know that for this game I had to do I had to dynamically generate out islands, and I knew it was going to take a while to do the math. So I even came up with like, what does the loading bar look like, and that kind of stuff. So I'm also like incredibly OCD, so I'm very structured, and I usually don't do anything without a specific plan. So, but once like a game like this is actually relatively simple because I've already designed a very simple UI language for it. So going through and mocking up each of these screens doesn't take me a lot of time because I already have the blueprints there. And then the most important thing that I do at the end is, well, before the end is I actually go through and I mock up some of like the resources, the stuff in it that requires the math in order to figure out what the balance is like for the game. And I try to do as much balancing as I can in my head and on paper before I start doing it in the game. I also try to make very data-driven games so that at the end, I'll have like one sort of like sheet of data where I can just go through and manipulate it in order to help fix the balancing. And then the last thing I do is I go through and I just start mocking up all of the different items that'll be in the game and what they look like. So in this game, there's a sort of like an evolution. You can upgrade buildings in the game. And this is really important because a lot of times I'll work with another artist. So I'll mock up stuff. This is artwork that I had ahead of time for the game. But I'll make sure that even if it's just roughed out stuff, I'll give the artist exactly what I need. So that this way they are really organized too, and I don't have to go do a lot of back and forth like, okay, let's try this, let's try that. It's like, all right, this is what I see in my head, and this is what I need to be cleaned up so it looks decent for other people to play. Even stuff like for auto tiling, I'll go through and I'll build out a template. So at this point, I've done so many games that I already know the math of how I want the auto tiling to work. So I have a template, and I'll be like, here, take this template and just make the ocean, make the animations for me. This is the basic thing that I need to do. Fog of war. So if I needed, like this game, I needed to add something to hide the tiles. So I went through and just sort of mocked up how I wanted it to look so I can make sure that it actually worked out correct. And then at the end, it's just all the data and the resources and everything that makes up the rest of the game. So that's just one example of a design document. Something like this took me a couple hours, but the next 2 days of building the game went by a lot faster because then I just had something to reference it. It's also a little bit larger simply because it has a lot of images in it, right? But you can choose how much detail you want to put in or how little you want to put in. You don't even have to do any art if you don't want to. So that brings me to this. So if you guys saw on the table when you guys are coming in, I brought some game design notebooks, and this is something that I've worked on as a project as part of the partnership initiatives that we've been doing where we help sponsor a lot of events, mostly like game jams, and what we wanted was to be able to give people at game jams a book to help them organize themselves. And if you haven't gone through it, it's just really simple. There's some instructions on how to use the book. And then I work with a lot of developers. I've worked with a lot of developers in the past, and we sort of compressed down what are the most important things when writing a game. And starting off with, what's the name of your game? But because I've actually gone through the process myself, I gave you 3 spots for names because sometimes the name isn't what you start with. It's one of 3 options, right? Building your team. If you're at a game jam, being able to actually go through and just write out who's doing what on the team and what is their contact information, especially if you've never met them before. Also going through and what's the pitch? What's your elevator pitch? If you're stuck in an elevator with someone and you want to bore them with your game idea, what would you tell them? Your game's features, your game's theme, your target audience. These are all important things that anyone has to ask at any level of making a game. And then just a bunch of empty space so that you can write in the rest of your game details. And then if you're on the art side, there's some grid paper. And we really worked hard on this to make sure that you can actually, there's darker dots on the edges to let you split the grid up into different types of boxes if you wanted to do mock-ups of the screens, or you just want the whole thing to draw on. And at the end, of course, it goes through and it tells you some great frameworks to use, like GameMaker. Also, what are your milestones? So if you're working in a game jam or something and you need to just make sure, like, okay, this day I want to get this done, the next day I want to have this done, and just keep you on target. And the last thing after resources and designing your icon are some instructions that show you how to publish it to the Amazon Appstore, which we'd love to have your games. Why not? The final page is the most important part of this, and this is what I stress the most to people. After a game jam or after you design your game, take pictures of the notebook and share it online, because the most important thing for us to do as game developers is to actually share ideas with others and how we structure it. So a lot of people get really protective. It's like, my idea, I don't want anyone to steal my idea. I've spoken to thousands of game developers over the years, and a lot of ideas I've heard, not so unique, right? Like, no one's going to build the same game that you're thinking you're going to build. So it's okay to share your ideas with others, especially if you've built the game. Show people how you actually built it. And starting with an instruction manual is a really good way to do it. So be open to sharing and teach others how to build it so that they can get better. And you'll see that the more people that are building games, the more we'll be inspired and the more great games that I get to play. So that is the design notebook. Please take 1 or 2 if there's enough left on your way out and use them and share them. So once you've sort of fleshed out the ideas of your game, then it comes to prototyping. And this is really important. A lot of the stuff I do, I just simply prototype ideas all the time. So I have like folders full of just prototyped bits and pieces of games. So when I go into a game jam or I want to build a game, I can actually just take a piece like Legos and say, all right, I want this mechanic, and this mechanic, and I'll throw it together and try to make it work. A lot of the times what I do, even in game jams or just whenever I'm making a game, is paper prototyping. So is anyone not familiar with paper prototyping? So long story short, it's just basically you just build a paper version of your game. It's very expensive to prototype your ideas in code. Maybe you're a coder, so you don't feel that way, but time is money in some respects. And actually spending time writing code and then scrapping it and starting over again, especially to do balancing, is really tough. And there have been game jams where I've just started paper prototyping and then just left it as a paper game. So don't be afraid to experiment, and you can always do vice versa. Build a paper prototype and then turn it into a digital game, and that always works really well too. So how many people here like do game jams? All right. So you guys are probably going to be really familiar with this, so I'll just breeze through this. But has anyone taken part in 1 game a month? All right. Still doing 1 game a month? No, yeah. I did it the first year. I came in 3rd place, and it was intense. But one thing I learned from this and what I love about this game jam the most, outside of being good friends with Krister, is that um, it forces you to not worry about what state the game is when you're done. So at the end of the month, just ship it and move on to the next thing. And a lot of times what I do was I would create a game, ship it, even if whatever state it was in, and then the next month I would take the core of that game and then redo it and do something else. But at the end of the year, I wound up with all kinds of UI and stuff that was reusable from my other games. So it's intense. It's a lot to make a game each month, but it really gets you in the idea of just like being more comfortable with like trying an idea and throwing it out. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, move on. Ludum Dare, very popular online game jam. Really love this one. I've taken part in it for years. Past few years I haven't had a chance to because I've been working on my own thing, which has taken up some of my time. But it's worth a try. And if you're not comfortable doing game jams, I highly suggest just doing the jam. And so the compo is the 48-hour one, and you have to do all the code and artwork at during that time, which is intense. The jam actually is 72 hours, and you can bring your own stuff. So that game design document was just a game, pieces of a game that I already had, and I just do the jam, and I just try to make it work. I find that a lot more fun. So one year I came in 32nd place in the jam for my game Dragon Sweeper, and I felt it was pretty impressive because it's really hard to break the top 100, and 5,000 people had competed in that one. So I felt like I was onto something, and after the game jam, I took the game and polished it up, and then released it and put it on the Amazon Appstore and a few other places. And you know, it's a good litmus test because what's really good about Ludum Dare is that everyone rates your games, and the only way you're allowed to rate the game is if you actually release the game. So you don't get a lot of like, this game sucks because it sucks, or like 1-star random votes, unless your game really does suck. But that's like a whole other thing. So you get really good critical feedback from people who have actually gone through the same experience as you. And also you can tell based on your rating, it's a good litmus test to see like, is my game gonna be popular or not, or is it worth spending some more time? So I use game jams a lot for just trying out crazy ideas and then seeing whether it works, and if I do really good in the game jam, then I'll go and I'll develop the game more. There's Global Game Jam, which is a much, much bigger event, which is coming up. And then I just finished sponsoring Splash Jam and was at Splash Jam. Has anyone not heard of Splash Jam before? It's a really awesome event. It's a game jam on a boat in Norway. So you wind up going through like the fjords and seeing like the northern lights, and it's really awesome. And I put it up here because it's a very small game jam, but what's interesting about it is that one, the scenery is amazing, and it was actually the point where like we were doing interviews with developers on how they do game jams, and every time we'd mic this one guy up, they're like, the Northern Lights is going. You see in the background, everyone's like getting up and running. So like we'd have to stop, go upstairs, see the Northern Lights, and then we'd come back down, and then be like, the Northern Lights are going, and we'd all get back up. But it was very inspiring. So to be in a different location, a lot of times we do game jams from like home, but go to a place where there's actually a game jam, and sometimes that one, you are out of your element because you're not in a place where you normally know people, so you get to meet new people. But two, the scenery itself really inspires you, and try to find new locations to make games. So some popular frameworks. Hey, look at that. We know these guys. Game Maker Studio 2. Again, this is a very generic talk, so I didn't have to like, you know, explain it. You guys are probably all, has anyone not heard of Game Maker? just checking. All right. And then we'll just like go through these ones. We don't really need to worry about these other ones. There's nothing to see here. Just some other frameworks that also support the Amazon Appstore. So in case you dabble in other frameworks, they're there. Hey, and at the end, whatever tool you use, Game Maker Studio, we just want your games. We really strive hard. There's a lot of people on my team that are not just here to get stuff in the store. We actually are really big game fans. We love playing games. We want more games on the store, and especially if you're doing anything from like a game jam or something that's more polished, or if it's already running on Android, it will probably work on our store as well. So we would love to get your games. I wrote this post 4 years ago when I joined Amazon, but it's still very relevant, and it really is that we just want to make our App Store a home for games, and we want your game. So if you got a game, you can always shoot me an email. Pro tip, you put the contact information at the end of the slide. Although I do have an empty bit.ly. So I'll take that. But you can always send me an email. I'm happy to put you in touch with any of our evangelists who can help you with more information on how to get promoted in the store and how to get featured, stuff like that. And we also have a page, developer.amazon.com, which is our normal developer portal. But we've been building out this cross-platform page, which just talks about all the tools that support Appstore. And for you guys, what's probably important is that we've been working with some community developers, from game maker developers, to post some really great articles. So we have some really great stuff going up now from people in the community, not just us writing to do marketing stuff. That part of what I do is go out and I know a lot of developers in the industry, so I go and try to find the right people that can actually tell you guys stuff that you guys will hopefully learn. So if you check that out, we've been featuring some of the articles. We're gonna have an ebook coming out in the future on just doing some stuff with Game Maker from a very popular game on another platform that's being ported over, and it just talks to you how the game was made and how they use Game Maker Studio. So there's a lot more stuff coming, so bookmark this or whatever people do. I think you can put it in an RSS feed, I don't know. And reach out if you have any questions. Hopefully I'm good on time. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Thank you very much, Jesse. The perfect companion piece for something that Nick did.